Don't you just love it when a bunch of people jump in and start stealing credit for your actions, especially when you were trying to be humble and not even take the credit yourself, just doing something good? Hello guys, Yuusaku here, and welcome to my review of Yugioh Vrains Episode 3. Now this episode features a number of different things. I mean, we are seriously all over the place, focusing on a bunch of different characters, including some that hadn't been introduced outside of pre-release information. All of the plot stuff includes, but is not exclusive to, some information on Revolver's background, some information on Go's background, some more information on how Vrains avatars work, introduction to Emma, and introduction to more of the chess pieces other than just Bishop. So we've got a lot of things to cover, folks, and we'll start with what I did the intro on, which is the Vrains avatar system. Now, we're given a pretty funny scene early on in this episode where we've got a bunch of different people who have disguised themselves as Playmaker within the Vrains world, all of which have totally different voices, one of which is static-y and glitchy and, not exactly looking correctly visually within the digital world, and another one is super muscular with a build similar to that of Go's, and that just shows you that you can make yourself look like pretty much whatever you want within the Vrains space, which could definitely play an aspect in the plot later on, especially with a lot of the major actions taking place in Vrains, because then things like double agents and whatnot, especially if you're good at manipulating your voice, are pretty easy. Or if you're, a programmer like Yuusaku or Hanoi or Soul Tech, yet again, are three main factions, they could probably modify your voice within the digital space to make it sound like who you want, and then you can give yourself an avatar that looks like who you want, and then this whole playing whatever side is a complete possibility, because people are pretty unlikely to doubt someone who has the correct voice and correct appearance, regardless of knowing the fact that they're in Vrains. There's also kind of that subconscious trusting of something that your eyes tell you and your ears tell you. Within this scene, we are also introduced into a bird and toad looking characters. I understand those are both each of their respective avatars. I doubt they'll play much of a plot role, though they are giving us some light narration and a little bit of sarcastic commentary that's kind of funny, especially mocking the one Playmaker that's really glitching out. I personally believe that if they do have any role down the line, it'll just be similar to maybe the announcer from 5Ds at best in terms of how relevant they are, though I wouldn't be surprised if they just turn into those background characters that pop up once in a while without really contributing to this main story at all. So let's jump back to the very beginning of this episode, which picked up where episode 2 left off, with Yuusaku having overcome the Knight of Hanoi in a speed duel. But the interesting twist that we got is, as soon as Yuusaku became victorious, the Knight decided he was going to literally try and blow himself up to take Yuusaku down with him. And to me, this makes me wonder, what kind of training do these Knights go through under Revolver's leadership that they are willing to go that far for their cause? He will not accept a defeat. Is it a kind of a dishonor thing, or is it, I won't be taken prisoner, or is that my mission is to take down this person because he's our enemy and I will do everything I have to get there? Regardless, it's kind of terrifying, the amount of dedication they have, and it makes me question how much of a factor that's going to play down the road. Are we going to see a lot of these Knights being willing to do absolutely anything to achieve their ends? And maybe that would be what causes Revolver to turn good in the long run, is maybe they take a step over where he's willing to go in the moral boundary lines. In this same scene, we also realize that Ignis is capable of at least a lot more than I thought he was in his current state of being trapped inside Yuusaku's dual disc, in that he jumps out and swallows this Knight whole so that he can't blow up and pretty much kill Yuusaku. So that makes me wonder, what are Ignis's limitations within that dual disc if he's able to manifest himself within Link Vrains? Does that mean somewhere down the line he'll be able to manifest himself in the real world? Is he able to pretty much do as he pleases in Link Vrains? And if so, why hasn't he escaped? If I was Yuusaku, I'd be a little bit concerned, as this means my hostage hostage probably has a way out if he really wants it. I mean, under these circumstances, what's to stop him from swallowing Yuusaku in a similar manner? Sure, he's got that little stream of him that's still connected to the dual disc, but if he can reach all the way over to that Knight of Hanoi, he can easily reach Yuusaku. With that being that case, why can't he just threaten Yuusaku? If he doesn't release him, he will suffocate him to death, or something along those lines. If I were Yuusaku, I'd be taking a close look at what Ignis can and can't do inside that dual disc, because otherwise Yuusaku may be in serious danger. Especially considering the only thing he can probably hold over Ignis's head at this point is that he is the only one who can free Ignis, and given later in the episode we see Ignis starting to reprogram this other AI bot that works at Yuusaku's house, Ignis might be able to find someone else to free him, at which rate he doesn't need Yuusaku anymore and there's no reason he can't just kill him off. Sure, he seems to show a little bit concern for his safety early in this episode, but yet again, isn't that his own safety at risk too? Let's move on to the introduction of more chess pieces, as probably implied by the fact that Bishop was literally standing within a giant bishop. There definitely were more chess pieces. The ones that appeared in this episode were the Rook, the Knight, and the Bishop, which are probably the lower ranking ones, minus the pawn. They may not actually have a pawn, they might consider the people their pawns, I'm not really sure. But assuming they have other ones, the King and the Queen are probably the head leaders, the other three just are kind of the in-between people, between people like Akira Zaizen and the rest of the chess pieces who are fully in charge of Soul Tech. Regardless, this shows another 6 pattern, as there are 6 different types of pieces in chess: pawn, knight, bishop, rook, king, and queen. 6 birds, so 6 versus 6 at the end of this arc, maybe similar to Signers versus Dark Signers. They had even numbers fighting each other. It seems to be a theme for some of the more well-liked arcs in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which would then also include the Waking the Dragons arc from Duel Monsters and the Burying Onslaught arc from Zexal, which sort of had that pattern, at least when the Onslaught arc started. But these new pieces are introduced to us during a meeting between those 3 pieces and Akira Zaizen, who's the head of security for Vrains, as we already knew. Basically, they're explaining how Vrains has turned into a very dangerous environment after everybody witnessed the speed duel that Yuusaku had when he was in his Playmaker form. So now people are trying to participate in these speed duels, as we saw with those 2 guys who ended up getting taken out by a security probe and like netted and their accounts being deleted. So they're wondering how to tackle that. Then they're suggesting that they take down Vrains for a little bit. Zaizen actually suggests the opposite. Keep Vrains up, let it turn into Playmaker and the Knights' combat field. That way they don't end up fighting somewhere else like the real world. This shows a lot more care than I think we've seen in previous episodes by Zaizen towards the people who are users of Vrains, or just people generally. Although I'm not sure it's entirely genuine, as if those 2 factions are fighting within Vrains, which Soul Tech controls, then they can watch everything that's going on, which I think might be his real motive, because then he can spy on where Ignis is constantly in order to be able to reobtain it and get back to his key point, profits. With his mission of still needing to find out who Playmaker is so they can eventually get back the Ignis in mind, Zaizen then immediately goes to recruit Emma. This should tell us something about Emma, as Soul Tech is a very wealthy company, so if they're going to her, then clearly she does her job very well, which seems to be obtaining information. She also seems to be a duelist, as she does double check with Akira that no, you don't want me to duel Yuusaku. She seems intrigued by the fact that she gets to investigate him though, but also seems to only be doing it because she has some interest in doing it herself, which goes back to that selfishness. I also think the fact that she rides a motorcycle, which is much more of a one-person vehicle, might be symbolic of her loner mentality. My impression of Emma thus far is that she's mostly sort of a spy type, at which rate I have a feeling she's going to try and worm her way into being kind of close to Yuusaku in order to gather the information she seeks, rather than just observing from a distance, though I could be totally wrong by that. As for Aoi and Go, they both appear very early in this episode, immediately after the whole incident with the Knight of Hanoi trying to take Yuusaku down with him. They both seek to challenge Yuusaku to a duel, most likely to try and reclaim the fame that he's been stealing from them by grabbing all the attention and being the hero of Link Vrains and whatnot. Go had already expressed that in the last episode, so we already know it to be the case. Aoi also seeks to duel him, so I'm guessing she's probably in a similar situation, given that she's supposed to be the cover girl of Link Vrains. She's not used to having somebody else swipe all this attention from her. I'm wondering if that reveals something about her character outside of Link Vrains. Maybe it's that she doesn't really get attention outside of Link Vrains at all. She's not used to people focusing on her, and as a result, she's really desperately clinging to whatever she can get within the digital world. I don't know. As for Go, we see him later in his own training dojo, which shows a little bit of his backstory, that he's kind of lives humbly despite having a lot of money. It's basically a souped up garage. He does have a manager who handles things for him, and he also owns this belt that looks like a WWE Championship belt, which connects further to his wrestling personality. But he's absolutely infuriated at Yuusaku gaining so much like from all the people, which contradicts some of what we were given in the pre-release information about him being a friendly, easygoing guy. Maybe that means very soon we're going to get a major character change from him into being a more friendly, easygoing guy. But either way, with his reputation, Akira actually approaches him while he's in the garage and makes him an offer with which he initially refuses to help Soul Tech hunt down Yuusaku. And his comment was, "I don't take orders from people." And you can take that as kind of a negative thing. You can take that as he's being rude towards Akira, but I actually took it as a good thing. It shows that he refuses to do something that he doesn't believe in himself, which I think shows a lot of strength in character and would connect back to what we were given in terms of pre-release information in terms of Go being a friendly guy. You have to have some confidence in your character in order to maintain an outward friendliness despite everything going on around you, which he clearly has. But before the end of the episode, it seems like his jealousy overcomes him as he does enter Vrains dressed as a knight of Hanoi, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was working with Akira that got him that disguise within Link Vrains, or that avatar I should say, and he's probably using it to lure out Playmaker because he knows Playmaker will duel anyone who's associated with the Knights of Hanoi in order to win his ongoing struggle against them. So Go shows the ability to have strong character traits. I think it's going to be a matter probably of Yuusaku maybe bringing them out, or somebody else, which is a common theme in Yu-Gi-Oh! And now I've saved the best for last, which involve the two scenes with Revolver within this episode, or technically three if you want to call it that. The first one involves him talking to Specter within the Knights of Hanoi base, or at least I'm assuming it's that we saw in the first couple of episodes. And the really cool part here is when he's talking to Specter about needing to get Yuusaku's identity and it not being that challenging, he lists 3 reasons in the same format Yuusaku does. His first being that Yuusaku hates the Knights of Hanoi, so he's going to be hunting them. His second, not many people have Cyverse cards, which means he'll be able to hunt him down based on being one of the only people who uses Cyverse cards within Vrains. And then third, which I find most interesting, Revolver says he'll come to me because he wants to battle me. Now at this point, I don't think Yuusaku and Revolver have necessarily had an encounter within the show, so I'm wondering if this guarantees that their past is somehow tied together. I mean, they both list things in groups of 3, and here it sounds like Revolver knows Yuusaku's going to want to duel him because of who he is. The question becomes, is it just because he's the leader of Hanoi, or is it because they have some kind of a past together before this? I would bet it's both. It's some of both. But we'll have to wait and see. The second of, I guess it's technically 3 scenes with Revolver, it seems he's managed to successfully merge aspects of the Vrains world and the real world, as he flies over where Yuusaku and Kusanagi are parked with their trailer, riding his dragon from the Vrains world. It has a similar color scheme to Cracking Dragon, but I don't believe it's Cracking Dragon. Its body doesn't look close enough to it. And he's still in his VR form while he's doing this, which yet again seems to connect to Yuusaku. Earlier in this episode, Kusanagi points out the reason Yuusaku might be able to get to the bottom of some of AI's programming is because he seems to always have a connection to the cyber world. Well, what would allow Revolver to connect the real world and the cyber world having some kind of a connection? So I'm wondering if Revolver's mastered this ability to connect the two, whereas because Yuusaku has lost much of his memory, he's lost a lot of his stronger capabilities, but he's still able to hack and program really well because that's kind of the base level of that skill set. The skill set being their connection between the digital world and the real world. Now, the other thing adding on to this is that in the first episode, we see Yuusaku state to Kusanagi that he's able to sense the presence of the Ignis when they're trying to capture it. Revolver does almost the exact same thing when Yuusaku's trying to break down the programming of the Ignis. He says, I can sense someone's doing something to it, and that's what leads him to where they're parked in the trailer in the first place. The third interesting thing that seems to connect them is, depending on how you want to interpret what Kusanagi asks Yuusaku, he says, what just happened? And Yuusaku says it was him on his dragon. Was Kusanagi not able to see it because he was inside the trailer, or was he not able to see it because it's something people only with this connection to the digital world can see? And that would explain why Yuusaku saw it and he didn't, because Yuusaku has the connection and Kusanagi doesn't. This brings us to our third and final scene with Revolver in the episode, where he actually steps out of Link Vrains and seems to be trying to carry on the mission of his father, Whatever that may be, it seems like it's connected to what he's doing as Revolver with the Knights of Hanoi and trying to destroy the Cyverse. Now, there's been a theory that's been going around for a while now of, well, what if Kusanagi's younger brother is actually Revolver? Much like a lot of other people, I didn't fully buy it to begin with, and some of the information I'm going to present supporting this theory is stuff I heard from Dylan over at Yugioh Everything when I watched his review of this episode. So full credit given to him on a decent amount of the support. But anyway, so when Revolver steps out of this, you see that his hair part is identical to that of Kusanagi's brother. And it's kind of like, okay, there's some decent evidence, but wait a second, in the first episode there was a 5-year time skip. Shouldn't that put him at much older than Yuusaku, given it's almost been implied that they've been around the same age range, where Revolver seems to be roughly the same age, as well as the silhouette of the guy who stepped out of Vrains. And I would say, sure, yeah, but who else do we see in the scene? His father. At which rate, couldn't his father have actually been the old Revolver? Given that we saw earlier in the episode, you can make your avatar in Vrains look however you want. And then people would say, okay, well, their voices are too similar then. That the Revolver would have to have been the same person for all those 5 years. Not necessarily. People in the same family often have fairly similar voices. And then recall what Yuusaku said in the previous episode about what he's rescuing Kusanagi's brother from. Darkness. Traditionally in Yu-Gi-Oh, darkness means evil, and what would Revolver be considered in Yuusaku's eyes at this point? Evil. I don't think Yuusaku knows that Revolver is Kusanagi's brother, but I think he might be aware that he fell to evil in some way, shape, or form. Then there are two other things to start making conspiracy theories about in this episode, and the first one would be, what on earth happened to Revolver's father and possibly Kusanagi and his brother's father that caused this? I mean, we know something caused Yuusaku to lose his memories. We know something caused Ignis to lose his memories. I'm wondering if they're possibly all tied together. Maybe Revolver got caught in all the sort of explosions and stuff he was causing to initially destroy the Cyverse. We don't know, and I don't think we're going to find out for many episodes to come. Then we've got that little mark that's on Revolver's hand when he sets it on his father's body that definitely brings flashbacks of signer marks from 5Ds to me. I have no idea where it's going to go, and I don't have any evidence like spinning me in any direction of any theories yet, but I think there's certainly a chance that maybe each of the people who have a bird representing them have a mark similar to that. Remember, Revolver has the red bird from what we've seen in the intro, so we're just gonna have to wait and see on all of that. So yeah, I think that wraps up all the points I wanted to make about this episode. Let me know what you guys thought about the episode down below. Did you really enjoy episode 3 the way I did? Are you intrigued by a lot of the mystery they're incorporating surrounding the plot? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and maybe even subscribe to the channel. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.